Hi, this is Dennis, and we're back again. We were doing the comparison between the Penn 104, the Silver Series, and the Daiwa 2600C Silver Series. And just as a recap, we did the Penn on the last video. We saw a technology that was comparable to the majority of technologies in the 1970s and 80s. It had a single ball bearing up top. It had a cam follower on the main gear that drove the spool up and down. Dependable metal casing made in Japan, and a survivor. What we saw was very similar. We didn't bring this up on that video, but it was very similar to the Ryobi reels, also made in Japan in that era. The difference being that the Ryobi reel did not have the ball bearing up top. It had 3 bushings, so comparable in styles, comparable in technology. One more ball bearing for the Penn. So today we're going to work on the Daiwa 2600C, and these typically were the 3 reels that you would find from Japan in the early 80s, all of them metal cased. And I said that, there was a debate for a while there. We'll see if we can answer that debate today about which one was the better of them or which one you preferred. And we're going to work on the 2600C, which is comparable to the 104. I'm going to take the spool off first. I like this aspect of it. We had a little plastic shield on here. We have smaller drag washers, but a plastic shield that attempted to keep some of the water out of that top of the spool there. All right, once we do that, then we can remove the handle. The handle is a through screw. Let's see if we can grab a big screwdriver for that. There we go. And you'll notice as I'm doing this that I have a lot of tools scattered around. That's because there's a lot of different tools required to repair reels. Everybody has just a little bit of a different approach, whether it's a different size nut on the rotor, a different size screw in the side plate, a Phillips head versus a flat head, and so on. So I recommend that you keep the tools that you need nearby. I also recommend that you kind of take a look at it ahead of time, know what tools you're going to need, and lay them out within your hand's reach. Only because a lot of times you're going to get these reels, you're going to be in the middle of something and find you need it, and if you put the reel down, you may lose the piece, the part, your place, whatever. So we noticed that we got a little bit of shellacking going on, which means this reel hasn't been serviced in a while either. This reel has 3 side plate screws, so we're going to go ahead and take them out now. They're Phillips head, and that's an example right there. I have 2 size Phillips head screwdrivers. The first one was too small, so we'll just reach over and grab the second one. I like working with my hands on these reels. I don't like using mechanical screwdrivers. I've seen other videos on YouTube and that where folks want to use them. I find that there's a chance or a risk that you could over tighten a case, or you could break a case if it's a plastic case because of the torque in those things. So if you use them, be careful. If you need them, I'm not going to tell you don't work on reels because you can't use them, but just be real careful. Okay, so what we can see here is it's been a long time since this reel is serviced. We got a lot of dirty grease in there, and that's one of the reasons why I wear the protective glove on my hand. I'm never quite sure what you're going to get here, and when you're not sure, the best approach is to err on the side of caution. We have a bushing that's sitting on the main gear here, and we're going to take the spool axle shaft off so that we can get to all the pieces and parts and clean them up. This one is held on by a small set screw that goes through the crosswind block and goes into the shaft. And you'll notice also that I'm putting all my pieces and parts into my parts tray. That way I know where to find them when I go to reassemble. Also trying to clean which ones I can while I do that, just it makes it easier. And we've got accumulated stuff on here. Got a little tarnish. That always cleans up well with steel wool. So if you have a little pad of steel wool by, you may not get the tarnish off, but if there's any residual grease and the like, it came off on the one side. Maybe a little bit more elbow grease. Nah, it's kind of tarnished. that's not going to affect it as long as it's smooth. Okay, once we get the tarnish out, then we can pull that main gear off. I'm going to use this because there's a lot of garbage on that main gear. And you'll see we have 2 bushings. So this is very much like the Penn. It has a ball bearing up top. It has the 2 bushings on the side of the main gears. And it's got a lot of neglect like the Penn did. So let's go ahead and take the dirty grease out of there. And while I'm doing that, I'm checking the teeth on the main gear here. I want to make sure that there's no broken teeth or excessively worn teeth. And I'm doing the same thing on the crosswind gear. And other than that dirty grease, which probably protected this part because it's a nice shiny part when you take the grease off, there's not much going on there. These bushings are kind of welded on tight there. I'm just going to put a little bit of WD-40 on this, see if we can't loosen up. Theoretically, on the bushing, it should turn on both sides. I imagine this one's just turning on the case itself. Don't put pliers on there. It's a Teflon thing. It's going to rip up if you do that. So I kept my needle nose pliers nearby. I do that so I can get the crosswind block out, the crosswind gear, and that'll give us access to the rest of this reel. And so for the most part, you're seeing that this technology is very similar to the technology of that Penn reel. It's metal case. It's a single ball bearing. It's got a kind of the same look even, and overall it's a survivor. It's been around a long time, and it's been fishing and catching a lot of fish, no doubt. So, you know, that debate, you can see why the debate would be there, right? You have 2 very similar reels made in Japan in that time, and very comparable in nature. Okay, I'm going to take this spool off then, the rotor off. I'm going to set that aside for a moment just so I can show you the inside of this. And boy, if this doesn't look almost identical to the Penn 104. So I don't know where these were made. I mean, I know they were made in Japan, but chances are that the manufacturer of these was job shopped in Japan, just like the outsourcing of the reels today to China. I'm not sure if these, I mean, Daiwa would have had its own shop in Japan. I'm not sure if Penn went somewhere else for that, or if they set up a manufacturing operation themselves. Maybe somebody can tell me that here while we're at it. And this is cleaned up. I'm just going to hit that again with a light spray of WD-40. It's a general degreaser. It's also a general lubricant, so you know, if you want, you can certainly use that. Check to make sure that the bail is operating properly. And take a little bit of oil. I use Realex oil for fishing reels. I'm just going to throw a little bit where the bail connects and up top here, just to keep that well lubed. I'm going to put that in the parts basket. I'm leaving these on the side because if I go to reinstall these after cleaning before I take this out, then what we're going to find is that they're going to fall out when I turn it this way. So we've seen the same thing on the Penn, almost, right? We saw a friction clip that was driving the anti-reverse dog on the Penn 104. On this one, we have a spring-driven lever. So I'm just going to pull this out to clean it up. And like the Penn reel that we did, I'm just going to take the oil and shoot it in under there to lubricate the pinion gear. No service is needed on that. Let's just go grab this off too. You can see the bearing under there. So I'm just going to flood that bearing from both sides, just like we did with the Penn. Put the collar back on. Put the anti-reverse back on. Now you notice me checking that. You got to make sure that that tooth of the anti-reverse gear, which I'm also going to oil, is that's a spring-driven one. I have the override set. You want to make sure that it intersects properly. If you put that on upside down, here's an example of upside down, you're going to find out that the tooth doesn't connect. So you want to make sure that you have the orientation on that properly. And let's say you were confused. Let's say you took this piece, you threw it into the parts bin there, you came back out and you said, oh my gosh, I forgot which way this thing went. Well, that's what taking pictures along the way is all about. If you took a picture before you disassembled on this, and then you got caught up, or maybe the phone rang, or you got distracted somehow, or maybe even needed a piece and part that needed to be ordered somewhere, and you had to step away from the job, you can always go back and reference the pictures as to where you were. So we're done with the up top servicing there. We're going to go take that rotor, we're going to go put that back on. I push up on the rotor, on the pinion gear, just because when you do that, it holds that up high enough that you can put the nut back on. And then once you put the nut back on, you want to tighten it down. You don't want to over tighten it. I like to do as much of it by hand tightening as I can, and then just finish the last turn or two. And then give it a spin just for a test on that one. So here's one of the things about the differences between the two. Because this one has that spring-driven one, and this one has the friction drive one. Let's see if we can get this. You don't hear the click, 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 click. Some people find that annoying. And it's just a matter of the way that the reel was built. But if you don't want other fishermen or anglers out there, or fishing persons, or whatever the proper term is these days, if you don't want them hearing that you're reeling, I guess you're going to go against the Daiwa, and you'll go for the 104C. All right, I'm just putting a good dose there on this. I'm just going to grab this. If you're ever going to use a pliers, put some wrapping around it so you don't dig the plier teeth into the bushing. I'm just going to, I'm using a channel lock pliers here. I'm going to put that on, make sure I can get a few turns with that WD-40 in there, just to loosen it up. There we go. And I'm going to do the same on this side. You can see that we're turning now. That's what we wanted to do. All right, then I'm just going to put the oil back in here. And unless these things were shredded or that, I wouldn't fool around at this point with putting that, pulling them off to do anything. There's no need for that. Especially on the older ones, if you risk breaking a gear, if you risk ripping up a piece that's not available, the return on that particular part this way is not that great in terms of getting it under there. You have it spinning, so we're in good stead there. We've checked all the teeth on this. We've checked the teeth here. A little bit of grease. You don't have to get grease in every channel of those teeth. We put some up top there on the pinion gear, so that will work its way around over time. We're going to put a little bit of grease in the channel for the crosswind block. I'm going to go ahead and grab the crosswind block now. There's an indentation in the back. You want to get a little bit of lube in there. Don't overlube that because it's going to clog the channel. Just enough that it's going to slide up and down on that crosswind block. Then we can seat that. The seating is that the one tag goes under the pole that controls the anti-reverse override. And again, if you took pictures along the way, you would have seen that before you opened the reel up. Now we're just going to work this into, kind of match it up here. It looks like I'm going to have to take this off anyway. When we pulled this off, when that came out, we pulled the crosswind gear off with that. So again, back to the pad for protection. There we go. So we got that off, and now what's happening is you can't get that through and seated without the other piece being in there first. So not a problem. And you saw how I did it, that I didn't rip it up. Again, what we did was we took the pad, we strapped it around the piece. This is a kitchen scrubby pad. You could use steel wool, you could use an old cloth rag or something, and then we just rotated it, and you'll see it here. So I wasn't going to take them off because, well, didn't need to be, but as long as we have them off, we can go ahead and we can put some lubrication on both sides of this then before we reinstall. Okay, so back to this one. This one belonged on the drive side. Now we can reinstall the main gear in here. We're in with the main gear. We have the crosswind block low. Now we can go take the shaft again, the axle shaft. It's got a deconfiguration. It's not round. Hopefully you can see that. That flat side goes forward when you go to install. And it's just a matter of squaring up the crosswind block with the shaft, which takes a little patience. But once you do that, you'll have the shaft lined up. And some of you have heard me say from time to time, I had a friend who told me quite some time ago, in order to do real repair, you need a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of a sense of humor, because things are going to go wrong, and a whole lot of patience. And I think he's probably right from my experiences. Okay, so just working that little crosswind gear reset here. I just put that into the shaft. Then we can close this reel up and we can go up top and show you the drag system up top. Okay, so with that done then, the case snaps on easily. Now there's a little tarnish in that. We'll get that later. I use a product called Purple Power. It's a general concentrated degreaser. I find that takes all of the residual tarnish in that off and gives it a nice shine. There's a lot of folks out there who use a lot of different things. I would just tell you that while you're servicing the reel now, it's a good time to degrease and clean the reel up before you put it back into action. So not only do you have a top performer, but you have a good looking reel while you're at it on the externals. So I'll just show you a quick shot of that as we button up the bottom of this reel. I want to button it up before I use the degreaser because it is a degreaser and we just put grease in below. I don't need to compromise that. So here's the product I was talking about. It's Purple Power. It's available at Walmart and automobile stores and the like. You don't need a lot because it's a concentrate. I use that same scrubby that we were using before. So you'll just see that it'll take it off pretty quickly. I'm not going to go over the whole thing here right now. You don't need me doing the dishes, but you'll just see that it just cleans it up nicely. And very little effort there. It is a good solvent there. Another reason to wear this glove though, right? You can see how quickly and nicely this cleans up. Just use the glove and keep the junk off your hands to the extent that you can do that. And I don't think you'll mind that. Okay, I'm just going to put the handle back on. We'll give it a test drive before we finish with the spool. So we're seeing three reels that are very comparable. The Ryobi didn't have the bearing up top, had the bushing. The Penn had the cam follower rather than a little bit more sophisticated spool drive assembly with the crosswind gear. And the Daiwa kind of had the crosswind gear, but it has that click, click, click with the anti-reverse. So there's pluses and minuses to all of these. This one's turning smooth and will last a long time. You can see the accumulated salt. I'm going to go back to that Purple Power for a moment. Just grab that scrubby again, run it through there, and you'll see how it kind of shines this up with minimal effort. And I'm a fan of minimal effort. Then I'm going to come up top, clean this off, and then we'll go inside with those drags. So the Penn has a bigger drag, right? We saw that yesterday or the other day on that video. And it had the Teflon drags in it, which are going to stand the test of time. They very rarely wear out or buckle. Yeah, so again, you can see the nice job it's doing there. So then finally, we'll just do the drag service on this one. I'll take that C-clip out, very similar to the way that the others were done, and pull this stack. This has a few more drags in it. I clean the channel in here. Again, we saw in the pen yesterday that was full of junk. This one's pretty clean, so maybe this one wasn't used as much out there. We have a hard washer. You don't have to do anything with the hard washer. And I've got the stack just as it came out. If you wanted to lay them out on your table, you could. The key here is to make sure that they're clean. These are Teflon washers as well, so other than the size, so the pen had fewer washers, but they were bigger. The Daiwa has a couple more that are smaller. I would say that the max drag capacity on both of these is probably the same. And that's all you need to do to service a Teflon washer. It doesn't need any oils, doesn't need any dry grease. They just need to be cleaned. Clip goes back in. Spool goes back on. Tensioner knob goes back on. And that's the reel. So it's inconclusive, right? Which reel is the best, right? So people have asked me about my personal opinion. I've been a Daiwa fan forever. I've just enjoyed them. But that doesn't mean that it's any better. It just means it's personal preference. And I get that all the time today. I get, is the Shimano better than the Daiwa Black Gold, better than the Penn Spin Fisher? And quite honestly, a lot of this stuff is just a matter of what do you prefer. And the last thing I just noticed as we were doing this, I forgot to mention, the pen has the internal bail click release, rides on the ramp and shuts the bail. The Daiwa's the old slam, right? You got to just slam it to trip the bail. So some folks don't like that either. So the debate can continue 30 years later about which reel is the better reel. I like to say you can't really go wrong with either one of them, and I'll throw that Ryobi in here too, because the Ryobi is a fine reel. All of them in that entry to moderately priced range, all of them from Japan, and all of them survivors. So I hope you've enjoyed this this little part of the series here. If you did, please like it, and if you want to see more, please subscribe. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for viewing.